What's up, everybody? Welcome back to U.S. History, and we're continuing on with our Kennedy era notes, where this is the third part of what will probably end up being about a 5-part series on the JFK presidency. So we've already covered like kind of his family background, his rise to power, and the election of 1960, and then the Bay of Pigs massacre that happened early on in his presidency. Another very important event that happens early on in his presidency, kind of in the first year he was in office, is the Berlin crisis. So let me go on here. The only thing you'll head or into your Cold War era notes for this presentation that I'm doing here, the part 3, would be the Berlin crisis. I want you to put a heading in for that. Now, remember in some of the previous segments, I talked about Kennedy's weak spot, and like all politicians have like strengths and weaknesses, and kind of have to appeal to the American public. So like optics matters a lot if you're in a democracy where you have to win elections and then re-elections. If you're a dictator, you don't have to worry about this kind of stuff so much. But of course, that's not the system we have in America. Now, Kennedy was seen as very strong on like kind of social domestic policy issues, and just being a charismatic leader that was reasonable and rational. The thing that was his like Achilles heel or his weak spot was a lot of people were not sure if this young, good-looking new style of president was going to be able to stand up to the communists and be tough on them. Now, Stalin was dead by this point. He had died back in like 1953, so he's been gone for a while. But the Communist Party is still firmly in charge of the Soviet Union. And actually, this guy named Nikita Khrushchev, Nikita is actually, it's a guy's name, even though I've had students say, that sounds like a girl's name. He was a guy, an old World War II general, kind of one of Stalin's like right-hand man, like lieutenant type characters. Anyway, he is now ascended to being the premier of the Soviet Union. So think same Soviet Union, same tough old kind of harsh regime, but a new face on top of the pyramid over there. Anyway, Nikita Khrushchev has been the premier of the Soviet Union for a while by the time Kennedy gets elected as president. Now, he is a very tough, old school, like he would have been the age, like he was a general during World War II, whereas Kennedy was a young soldier that was, just barely old enough to fight. So this guy is a generation older than Kennedy. He has been around the block a few times. Now, I don't have this on the notes, but I think this is important in kind of the lead up to the Berlin crisis. Very early on in the Kennedy presidency, there was a meeting where actually, like, usually when the United States and like the Soviet Union or China or some other powerful country would be meeting and negotiating a treaty, usually we send representatives, like our Secretary of State. Sometimes the Vice President would go. Sometimes it's an ambassador. Rarely do the actual leaders of the countries go and sit down and meet and talk face to face. But early on in the Kennedy presidency, that actually happened, where JFK and Nikita Khrushchev sit down and have kind of a meeting about like what's going on in the world and how the American policy is going to change with a new Democratic president. Now, Kennedy, and he admitted this later on, he felt like he was good to go. And man, he's ready for a debate with anybody and negotiating policy. He kind of thought that like, I think the Russians would be as enamored and, bedazzled by him as the American public was, because he is a very charismatic, camera-friendly type guy who is a smooth talker. Well, that was not how that meeting went. And I don't need you to write down a lot of details on it, but you could make a little note in there that in the initial meeting where Khrushchev and Kennedy meet each other and sit down and talk about policy, Kennedy went in fairly unprepared, and he got chewed up and spit out by Nikita Khrushchev, this crusty old man who was not at all camera-friendly. He would not have been a smooth talker at all, but he was a tough dude that knew his policy, and he knew what the goals of the Soviet Union were, and he kind of makes Kennedy look like some punk, unprepared kid at this meeting. That sends Kennedy kind of reeling after that, and he's like, oh man, I got to get more prepared for this. And then the Bay of Pigs thing happens, and that makes Kennedy, that's a huge black eye for him, and makes him look like he's going to be weak on communism and doesn't quite know what he's doing. So Kennedy feels like and I think think he was correct on this. He had to do some damage control, and he has to repair like the optics of him looking very weak on communism. So he feels like he's kind of put into a corner, and he has to take a stand on something. Well, we had already talked about how Berlin, remember, Berlin is over in the east or the communist part of Germany, but we had gotten Stalin back years ago at the end of World War II to agree to split Berlin up because it's the biggest city in Germany, one of the biggest cities in Europe. So we got him to agree to giving us half of the city, essentially. So Berlin, in a lot of ways, is the front line of the war on communism, kind of literally and kind of metaphorically speaking. There are, the city is divided into east and west. Anyway, families were split up, and there's a high tension there. If you remember back to the Berlin airlift, like Stalin tried to take it back and cut off the railroad lines. So for quite a while now, like the airlift has been done for over 10 years, but tensions are still really high in the city of Berlin. And that is one of the potential spots around the world that if there was going to be a war that would break out between the United States and Soviet Union, Berlin is on the top of the list of probable places where that could end up happening. Now, the Soviets, they always have regretted letting like the West or, the democracies, America essentially, have part of the city of Berlin because it's smack dab over in the middle of their territory. Now, from the German perspective, this is something you might want to jot a quick little note on too, just in your own words. If you were a German, the average German person would much, much rather be in the American part of Germany or the American part of Berlin than the Soviet-controlled part. Now, technically, East and West Germany are both independent nations, but West Germany and West Berlin kind of looks to America as it's like following America. That's kind of the alpha dog that they're going to take their marching orders from. East Germany and East Berlin totally look to the Soviet Union. So, anyway, if you were a German person, you would much rather be in West Germany or West Berlin. They got treated better. They had more freedom. And I think the German people feel like they have much more in common with America culturally than they do with Russia. Also, Germany and Russia have just historically been enemies. So anyway, being in the east side, the Soviet-controlled, the Russian-controlled part is kind of rotten. And the Soviets are mean to the Germans. They're still even over a decade later, kind of sort of punishing the people of Germany for World War II and what the Nazis did. So anyway, the city of Berlin is divided up, and it's split right down the middle of the city, where essentially there is a road that goes down that divides the American part, West Berlin, and the Soviet part, East Berlin. People in East Berlin commonly, like, people could go back and forth for their jobs. Families might have been split up, and for most of the period after World War II, kind of through the late 1940s and 50s, except for the time of the Berlin airlift, you could travel back and forth, and you could move freely back and forth. Well, the Russians are starting to have a big problem with that because a lot of the people in their chunk of Berlin would rather be in the west side of Berlin, and they feel like they're the America and our ideas of democracy and capitalism and making money and things like that. They feel like that is having a corrupting influence on communism in general in East Berlin. So they don't like that. They also know that a lot of the people of East Berlin really resent them. They'd rather be on the west side. So they feel like that is a problem. And kind of like how America has the policy of containment, where we're trying to prevent communism from spreading, essentially the Soviets have a very similar policy. They don't want American ideals in Western democracy and capitalism to spread and infect all of their territory in Eastern Europe. So they kind of want to contain West Berlin and the ideas in it and the people that live there in that chunk of the city, and they don't want people moving back and forth freely. So kind of out of the blue, one day in 1961, Nikita Khrushchev approves, and this is technically East Germany built this wall, but it's totally, the orders come from the Soviet Union and from Moscow over in Russia to start building a wall right down the middle of the city. When you see it, most people have heard of the Berlin Wall before. it looks like a prison wall. It kind of functioned like a prison wall. So they start building a wall down the middle of the city, and no longer are people, these Berliners, going to be able to go back and forth between the two sections of the city. They're walling it off, and they're keeping all of the East Berliners over in their chunk of the city, and not going to ever let them out. They're going to be treated kind of sort of like prisoners. That is seen as a huge threat. The people of West Berlin, who are still over in the free part, they freak out. They remember World War II. They remember the Berlin airlift. Now the Soviets are in there building a wall, and they know the Soviets would like to take over the whole city of Berlin and capture it. They're freaking out. And then, like, the Bay of Pigs happened, and Kennedy is a new president who's kind of younger, maybe weak on communism. Tensions are high there, where the people of West Berlin are totally freaking out. I know I'm repeating myself there, but they are very, very concerned. They find that wall going up disconcerting, and it makes them feel like trouble is on the horizon. And man, their days of being a free country might be, or a free part of the city there might be definitely numbered. Well, JFK actually makes a trip to West Berlin, and he gives a speech in front of like hundreds of thousands of citizens, German citizens that lived in Berlin, to kind of like put tensions down, and basically let them know that America has your back, and that I will be tough on communism, and no matter what, I'm promising you, we will keep you free and keep you kind of like on our team. This is one of the most famous speeches that Kennedy ever gives, and really kind of one of the more famous speeches probably in just American presidential history. It's called the Ich bin ein Berliner speech. Where Kennedy, several times throughout the speech, he says phrases in German to let the German people, like, you know what I mean? Just to kind of bridge that cultural or that language gap there. Now, Kennedy was not fluent in German at all. He prepared for the speech, and his speechwriters kind of, jotted out some phrases, and he practiced ahead of time. Now, one of the jokes that I've always heard about it, and I'm not 100% sure absolutely how factual this is, but it's at the very least, it's a super common like urban legend. But I think there is an element of truth to it. That when Kennedy said "Ich bin ein Berliner" with his kind of Boston, Massachusetts accent, that actually, if you're a German person, like, we would look at that and think a Berliner is somebody that is like a citizen or a resident of Berlin. But in that part of Germany, where there's different dialects, kind of, and they have different slang words that mean different things. Actually, a Berliner is like a jelly donut. So essentially, Kennedy was saying, he was trying to say, I'm a Berliner. I'm a person of Berlin, just like you, to make that connection there. But he kind of sort of told the crowd that I'm a jelly donut, which, you know what? Didn't matter. The people of Berlin totally got what he was trying to say, and they cheered, and they loved Kennedy, and he became epically popular over there. Even to this day, you go talk to like German people and ask them, who do you think the best American president was? Usually Kennedy is up at the top of the list, and that really actually meant a lot to them, that an American president would kind of come behind enemy lines to this little pocket of freedom and come talk to them and basically pledge that 100% America's got your back. Don't worry about them building this wall. If the Soviets try to move in on this turf and threaten you, America's going to go to bat for you, and we will, if necessary, go to war to protect you. So anyway, popular move. I think it helps Kennedy with the optics of being a little tougher on communism, him taking a stand here. It makes him very popular with the German people and just Europeans in general. They find him going over and giving that speech at that moment in history, right when the wall is getting built. That makes him very endearing to the people of Germany and Western Europe in general, that are feeling threatened by the Soviets. Now, in addition to the notes here, this is all the stuff you have to write down. I have a couple videos for you to watch. Both of them are really short. One is a snippet of the speech Kennedy gave. Now, television back at this time would have been in black and white. The video I chose for you has actually been retroactively put into color. So it really it looks a little bit funny because it wasn't originally shot in color. It was a black and white camera that shot it. But I think the color adding it to it really kind of makes it pop and come alive. If you want to find a longer snippet of the speech, you can definitely do so on your own on YouTube. But I basically just gave about a minute and 30-second chunk of his speech where he does deliver that very famous line. And then also there's another short 5-minute YouTube video that just kind of goes over what the people of Berlin was going through their mind when this wall started getting built, because pretty big event in world history, but especially for the people of Berlin. And it's something we'll talk a little bit more about down the road as we wrap up this quarter of U.S. history. Okay, hope this all made sense to you. If you have any questions, by all means, hit me up.